investigation sparked by a whistleblower.
I saw a lot of papers, and I saw one that really troubled me.
Shattered survivors.
Now they've broken her spirit again.
Several investigations, one lawyer guilty.
There was almost $1 million that survivors were entitled to that they didn't receive.
Residential school settlement agreement at risk.
For residential school survivors across Canada, the process of being compensated for physical and sexual abuse stirs up feelings of shame and pain. It means revealing dark and sometimes shocking details to strangers in order to get money from the very government that sent them to the schools in the first place. It's a complex process involving lawyers at every level, and it's created anger among some survivors who say it's attracting people who are taking advantage of them all over again. APTN Investigates Kathleen Martins is back with a second look at the independent assessment process.
Remember this elder?
Annie, how old were you when you went to residential school?
5.
And how long were you there?
10 years.
We told you about Annie Plume's failed application for compensation last fall. The Blood Tribe member was denied compensation for permanent injuries she insists she suffered at Indian Residential School. It's something she should have been entitled to under the Independent Assessment Process, or IAP.
Does your ear work now?
It's not really, not very good.
Her family blames her Calgary law firm, Blott & Company, for not arranging for the Blackfoot interpreter she needed. The foul-up angered her chief and nephew, Charles Weaselhead. A year ago, he alerted Chief Adjudicator Daniel Ish and Assembly of First Nations National Chief Sean Atleo to his serious concerns about the law firm, telling them, first, individual claimants may not be receiving the financial compensation to which they are entitled. Second, claimants, many of whom already suffer from disadvantages, are not being heard in the assessment process, and there is thus no real healing for them through the IAP. The chief says he received letters back, but no concrete action was taken. It appeared to him his aunt's law firm had too many clients and did not prepare properly so that Annie could have the support she needed for her hearing.
She went in there, they refused a translator to come in with her. They refused some kind of support, person to be with her, whether it was one of her children or one of a person that she trusts, that she would be in there with,
It wasn't the only time officials were made aware of complaints against Blott & Company well before a judge ordered a formal investigation last November. Sadly, Annie was sick when she spoke to us and died that month before her story aired and cases were put under review. But it was complaints from blood survivors that convinced BC Supreme Court Justice Brenda Brown to order the probe of Blott & Company files and Honor Walk, the form-filling company that worked with the Calgary law firm. The judge ordered an investigation into allegations that the companies worked together to recruit and overcharge survivors in an alleged scheme that violates IAP rules. In our special report last November, we showed that Honor Walk charged survivors $4,000 to fill out compensation forms, and Blott & Company deducted the amount from their payments. We also showed you that survivors were offered loans and big screen TVs through Blott & Company or Honor Walk before their compensation arrived, and how as much as 30% interest was charged on the loans, and the cost of electronics was deducted from their checks. A no-no under the IAP. A former Honor Walk manager in Saskatoon helped us.
That's Honor Walk. That's Blott & Company.
Kelly Bush also had concerns about how Honor Walk and Blott & Company were treating survivors in northern Saskatchewan. She complained to the Law Society of Alberta and has cooperated with the court's investigation. She isn't the only one to stick her neck out. Joanne Hansen put her professional ethics and reputation as a registered social worker on the line way before the court got involved.
So I kept hearing this, so you can go to the Law Society. Oh, yeah, okay. I'd gone even to the RCMP. I'd gone to every line of defense that I knew of at the time. Every one of them.
And
nothing, there was nothing. There was no recourse, there's nothing.
Hansen works with survivors from the Blood Reserve, providing counseling by referral. She says she was an employee of Honor Walk and provided support for their clients. People we showed you in our first story: Doris Bird, Erin Tallow, Marie Goodrider, and of course, Annie Plume.
She became my friend. I asked her family if they would ask her, because she was old and very ill, you know, is she up to having an interview with APTN? And they asked her, and she said yes, without a doubt. And she went there, and I was there. And then at the end, which you didn't catch on camera, and this picture is what I saw. She looked up at me and she says, if this can help one elder, then it's worth it for me.
Hansen told us Annie said she felt the need to talk about how a process that was supposed to help her heal instead hurt her all over again.
And it was nothing to do with money for Annie. All it was, she'd tell me this over and over and over again. I just want to tell my story.
After years of complaining without a response from the authorities, Hansen launched her own investigation. Hansen questioned people, copied documents, and recorded conversations. She shared them with APTN Investigates last spring, after 2 years of fruitlessly complaining through regular channels.
I asked the Secretariat's office and Dan Ish's office, you know, come and see this. The Secretariat's office was the one that said to me, well, what do you know? And I said, well, you know what I know. You've seen the files.
She was critical of what she saw as the lack of interest by a member of Ish's staff.
He said, well, I'm not sending anybody to that. I'm not doing that. And I said, well, then what are you doing? You know, and I actually asked him, so what kind of office do you have? And he says, well, I have a nice office with a window view. And I says, well, how much are you getting paid? And he said, well, I'm not at liberty to tell you or whatever. I can't remember exactly what he said. And I said, so you're telling me that you can't send somebody to southern Alberta when there's all this money for your wages?
She says other frontline workers on the reserve shared her concerns. Together they saw survivors lose large amounts of their compensation payout to legal and other fees. They watched them wait years to hear from and meet their lawyers, sometimes not until the morning of their compensation hearings. They were told sometimes a different lawyer would show up, with files that were incomplete or incorrect. And they discovered clients weren't properly prepared for the emotional hearings and the trauma they created.
What their concerns were that they weren't seeing their lawyers, they never got to see their applications, you know, stuff like that, the details. I phoned the Law Society myself, and they said they wouldn't take a report from me because it would be third-party reporting. But they encouraged me to write a report, and I did, but I didn't send it in, because then I called them, well, what happens to this report? It just goes to Mr. Blott. So why would I do that?
APTN Investigates again requested interviews with Blott, who did not respond, and Honor Walk President Tom Denom. Denom did offer to supply a written statement, but never did. We wanted to hear from the Assembly of First Nations and arranged an interview with its lawyer, Kathleen Mahoney. She is also a member of the IAP Oversight Committee. But Mahoney changed her mind, saying the AFN would comment once the judge's report was made public. There's a lot at stake for the AFN. Its former leader, Phil Fontaine, sued the federal government to establish the Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement. That leveraged billions of dollars to create compensation services for survivors, including the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It also, Fontaine announced in this letter, put the IAP in place of an alternative dispute resolution, or the ADR, that produced many complaints about lawyers overcharging clients. Blott has 3,000 IAP clients. If the investigation shows that many were not properly represented, it could be expensive to fix. A precedent may have been set in Manitoba last month in terms of how expensive. That's when Winnipeg lawyer Howard Tenenhouse was disbarred for overcharging 54 survivors. He pleaded guilty to, among other things, taking the full 30% in fees when adjudicators disallowed it.
So in this particular case, there was almost $1 million that survivors were entitled to that they didn't receive.
The Law Society of Manitoba says in one instance, Tannenhouse went to great lengths to get the money, accompanying one survivor to a bank and demanding he deposit funds in the lawyer's wife's account. Feinblatt says Tannenhouse is the first lawyer in Canada to lose his license for financially abusing vulnerable survivors.
It's a penalty that is reserved for the most serious type of conduct.
Feinblatt says Tannenhouse was caught because survivors filed complaints, and so did Daniel Ish. Tannenhouse was ordered to repay his clients, but because that may take time, the Law Society has already cut the checks and intends to recoup the money from its disbarred member.
If we didn't recover anything from Mr. Tannenhouse, then we would be out of pocket. But it's our responsibility, we think, and I think it's unique to the legal profession, that if one lawyer who turns out to be a bad apple steals, every other lawyer will pay it back.
The allegations against Blott and Company and Honor Walk have not been proven. The court-ordered investigation is complete, but the findings have not been made public. Yet the Law Society of Alberta won't confirm it's conducting its own investigation into Blott and Company, despite the fact that its investigator requested an interview with the executive producer of our show, which did not take place.
It looks like the legal community's disciplinary system is working, that lawyers in the residential school compensation process who don't follow the rules are being rooted out. Or are they? Stay tuned for part 2. In a special report last fall, APTN Investigates revealed complaints against a Calgary law firm about the way it represented residential school survivors seeking compensation for abuse. Since that startling story aired, the firm's tactics have been investigated in a report to a judge that's expected to be made public any day now. To the best of their knowledge, officials believe they have a good handle on correcting the problems. But our original story also brought fresh complaints to APTN Investigates from survivors angry about lawyers in other parts of Canada. Survivors who say all of their cases should be reviewed.
James Poitel has always struggled with the burden of residential school. At 10 years of age, his life as he knew it was over.
And I was sat in a chair similar to this, and the person took this clippers and just started cutting my hair, just cut, bang, bang, bang.
James says he was ripped from his happy family and shipped to a punishing residential school on the island of Alert Bay.
After they cut my hair, I was washed in some kind of a solution. I don't know what the heck it was. It stunk anyhow. And it was washed my head, and I found out why. They said because in case you had lice or bugs in that there.
He says he came out a rebel in every way. A little of that still remains today.
No, I'm not a survivor. I'm a voice, and this is what I want to be. I want to be a voice of the residential, not the school, the residential environment that I want to remove myself from.
James and his older brother work here at the Campbell River Indian Band Net Loft on Vancouver Island, where fishing nets are stored. They went to the same school.
We're on the boat running around having fun, just like kids. We're excited. All of a sudden, the boat left the wharf. I see my mother on the wharf, crying.
He describes it as hell and says he held a lifelong grudge against his father for failing to protect him until a deathbed revelation.
At that moment, I'm starting to understand what it was all about now. He had nothing to do with it. And I said, well, why did you wait so long to tell me? All these years, I thought it was your fault that we went there. So we both cried, he's on his deathbed, so, but it was kind of late now.
James admits he became a vandal and a thief.
I hate it with a passion. I hated anybody who spoke with me as authority. Anybody had any kind of stuff like that was authoritative figures.
Campbell became an addict.
I got to hate non-Native people for years upon years because what had happened. I had somebody to blame. I became an alcoholic. I did drugs. I tried to commit suicide several times. I hated the world because I couldn't measure up to out here. I couldn't do what I should be doing in life.
Now they're waging another battle, one for compensation for the physical and sexual abuse they suffered at school. They are frustrated and angry they have to hire and trust lawyers and do what the government tells them in order to be compensated.
And to me, that's where I said, okay, here we go again.
It angers me so much that my wife tells me I cry when I'm sleeping.
Campbell applied for compensation under the ADR, or Alternative Dispute Resolution System, 9 years ago. He is still waiting. So he fired that law firm and is trying again with a new lawyer under the independent assessment process. He estimates there are thousands of survivors disillusioned with the compensation process on Vancouver Island alone.
How I feel about it now, it's become a greed epidemic. It has come to a level of madness.
Simon James carves totem poles just down the road from the net loft. He was sent to the same school as the Quatels, where he likens the abuse to torture.
I can honestly say that the law firms, counselors, therapists, and even directors of programs have become wealthier than the survivors. It has just become a horrendous story of how we're now being treated by lawyers.
Other survivors we spoke to off-camera say they were charged for legal expenses the government was supposed to cover, like travel, meals, and accommodation. Some also say they took loans from their lawyers at high interest rates.
Rumors are there was money loan lending out there, there was this and all kinds of things that were happening out there, that these lawyers were double dipping and stuff like that.
Survivors say they want to file complaints with the Law Society of British Columbia.
Like these fishing nets behind me, the anger here about the compensation process is strong and deep. Survivors in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC all tell us the same thing. They are getting older, the compensation deadline is looming, and they have yet to be paid.
Brian Stewart attended Port Alberni, one of the most notorious Indian residential schools in the country. He says the beatings and sexual violence he experienced scarred him for life.
I'll never forget it in my lifetime. I was too ashamed to talk to her about it to my wife. I didn't tell her about me getting raped. I was too ashamed. Praying to the Lord to stop the pain. Make it a bad dream. This whole thing's a dream. Unknown dream.
But working towards individual compensation has been an all-too-real nightmare since 1996, they say. Brian, who lives in Nanaimo, has hired 3 separate lawyers, the last one through Honor Walk, the Alberta form-filling agency that works with Blott and Company. His wife, Nora Fred, spied the Honor Walk poster at a local friendship center and called the toll-free number. She says she received a telephone call from lawyer David Blott and later an IAP package in the mail.
I left messages on his cell phone. So one day, just out of the blue, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I got a phone call from him. And he asked me if Brian had received any compensation at all from his common experience. And I said he did. And then he said, who was your lawyer? And then he mentioned Sam Stevens, and it dawned on me, Sam Stevens, how do they know each other?
Sam Stevens of Parksville was Brian's 3rd lawyer. He helped the Stewarts obtain a $3,000 loan from settlement lenders, the same Alberta company that provided high-interest loans to Blott clients in Alberta. Stevens deducted the amount from Brian's eventual compensation payment, charging him $750 or 25% interest, for a total of $3,750.
How much did he get?
96. After deductions. 96-783-07. To me, that's It's diddly.
As you've seen, some survivors are very angry with the compensation process and the people who work within it. They're feeling hurt and used instead of helped and healed, not only in Alberta, but also on Vancouver Island. It appears all they can do is complain and wait, now that the process is back in the hands of judge and lawyers, the very people who helped establish the IAP rules in the first place. Or will the Harper government step in? We asked a member of the Conservative cabinet.
Some residential school survivors want answers about who is looking out for them in the compensation process. But Aboriginal Affairs Minister John Duncan wasn't available for an interview. His staff sent his parliamentary secretary, Greg Rickford, instead.
Be happy to talk to you about it.
Rickford is a lawyer who signed the residential school settlement agreement on behalf of Kenora law firm Keshen and Major before entering politics.
These are some of the most unfortunate stories that the mind can contemplate in the context of Canadian history.
Rickford says the government is only one party to the class action settlement for compensation. The court is the boss.
It is the responsibility of the court, and certainly no place for the government to assert its interests over anyone else. In this kind of settlement, our preoccupation is with our own compliancy to the terms of the agreement.
So who determines if the government is doing what it's supposed to? Rickford says that's why they established Daniel Ish's department. He oversees the adjudicators who take the abuse statements. Ish also monitors lawyers working with survivors.
Our government, in response to the settlement, had an entire secretariat established to deal with any and all issues and implications that the federal government would have in terms of obligations arising from the agreements.
But Daniel Ish has no policing power over the lawyers. That belongs to the law societies in each province. Rickford says the government won't get involved in complaints against lawyers.
As the federal government acted responsibly and lived up to the obligations, and I would submit that, in fact, we have, like any other signatory or person or party of interest, share the concerns that you're expressing here today. We do know that there's mechanisms to deal with those, and I expect that they'll be dealt with in those forums.
There you have it. Next week, Todd Lamoran takes a close look at the dispute over treaty negotiations in Gitxsan territory in northern British Columbia. I'm Cheryl McKenzie. Thanks for watching. Good night.